there's a similarity between Memphis and Vegas. And what it is that people arrive with preconceptions that allow them freedoms they don't allow themselves at home.
Welcome to the Shellcast, a show about music, culture, and Memphis.
As we live into our mission of building community through music,
education,
and diversity,
we look forward to interviewing artists and musicians and hearing about how they are writing their own stories,
building their own communities.
85 years strong, and with a rich history, the Levitt Shell has stood the test of time as a beacon of hope in the heart of Memphis. I can actually do that one more time.
This podcast is brought to you by Orion Federal Credit Union, where a big part of us is being a big part of the community. Visit orionfcu.com to see how Orion is redefining banking. Hi, and welcome to the Shellcast, episode 20. If you heard our last episode, you learned that Emmy and Grammy-winning author, historian, and filmmaker Robert Gordon is also pretty much a walking history book when it comes to Memphis music. Robert and fellow Memphis legend Steve Selvidge sat down for a conversation about Robert's epic book, It Came From Memphis. That book is full of facts and stories that go a long way towards explaining why Memphis has always been at the forefront of the world's music scene. This is part 2 of our 2-part series with Robert Gordon.
Speaking just to the general sort of, vibe of your book, like the notion that Memphis music as an entity and as something unique, and not just because like we had this hit and this hit and this hit.
Right.
It's this sort of intangible that runs through all of it.
Yeah.
Was there a moment or a series of moments where you became aware of that? Like, wait a minute, like I'm a music fan, but
right.
Wait, like this is our own thing, and it's not like.
There's 2 answers to that.
Okay.
One is when you realize that the blues came from Memphis, mm-hmm. and that Stax's soul music came from Memphis, and that Son Elvis's rock and roll came from Memphis. You realize that, wait a minute, there's this progression of music from blues to rock and roll to soul, and you realize it's happening here, then you begin to go, wait a minute, it's got to be a reason, and
mm-hmm.
the reason is we're the capital of the Mississippi Delta.
Right.
That's what I think. But yeah, and I was going to tell you something else about the way it all came together. It was really reading Peter Guralnick's book on Sam Phillips. So 5 years ago, not very recent, that I got the realization. It helped me understand my book.
Right.
Because I didn't realize, I've had people tell me this book changed my life, and that it really opened them up to things. And because I was just writing what I knew, and I didn't have any real distance from the book, mm-hmm. I couldn't understand that. But in prepping this edition,
right, I
got a new sense of the book and what it was, and I realized that I'd had the light bulb with Sam Phillips' book, which emphasizes Sam's motto of "Give me something different."
Right.
Right. I want something different. And what I realized was that Memphis music and this book and all things like that out of here, they redefine success.
Right.
Success is not the perfect production and perfect harmonies and the number 1 hit. Success is capturing an individual sense of personality, and and that's what the blues and rock and roll and soul have allowed. They've allowed Elvis to tap into that forbidden place in his mind where he can hop and skip in his mind as he scats along to That's All Right Mama.
Right.
Or it allows Booker T and the MGs to sound so much, to maintain a personality through all their songs and for each song to have so much character and be recognizable as theirs.
Right.
You know, that what the Memphis thing is about the expression of individual personality, and that what that is it's not about trying to have a hit that sounds like everybody. It's trying to have a hit that sounds like nobody.
Right.
We want to be the mistake. We want to be the thing that's different. You know, trends begin here a lot of times.
Sure.
Because we do stuff different. You know, follow-up hits if, there's not Taylor Swift Jr. coming out of here. Taylor Swift Jr. comes out of LA and New York.
Right,
You know,
right.
That's what New York and LA are for. We're like a place, sort of like Hibbing, Minnesota, you know, or we're the outlying place that allows the freakish thing to work its way to the top and influence everybody.
Right. I remember.
What do you think?
Well, you know, I remember in that Charles Terry footage.
Yep.
I remember my dad saying that Memphis gave people the latitude to just be able to create.
Yeah.
You know, and just, I think it's
a freedom.
It's a freedom, and it's almost not even a conscious freedom. It's just like you like it's just you wouldn't know it any other way. It's just like you're just left alone. You know, I mean, and that goes all the way through the grifters.
Yeah.
You know, and just I'm really curious to see how it. You know, we're all so much more connected now. I wonder. It's and you know, and now I'm like of an older generation, and you know, but
Tell me about it.
I'm curious to see what, you know, people moving forward, you know, younger musicians, how they're going to reflect that.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people seem to be sort of aware of the past and take things from it, but
I think even in hip hop, you know, it was not an accident that crunk,
Yes.
you know, established itself here. That 3-6 got their own tone. Even if 3-6 has never heard of Furry Lewis or
Right.
Stax Records or Jim Dickinson or Mudboy, there's a freedom in the city.
yes.
You know, people used to love to come to visit me in high school and college because I would take them to a world unlike anything they'd ever experienced.
Yes. And it's interesting with Memphis because people, there's no gray area, and I think it sort of defines who you are as a person. You come here, and people either get it and love it, or they freak out and get away as fast as they can.
Yeah.
You know, I remember what Jimmy Crossway saying. It's like, Memphis is like a big rubber band. The farther you go, the harder you snap back. But I mean, so back to, you know, you asked me what I think. Like, you know, sometimes I wonder if I'm just completely talking craziness, but like, there's a real metaphysical component to me, and you say freedom based in oppression.
Yep.
And
Hatred, man. The city is built on hatred.
And this whole book is about collisions.
Absolutely.
You know, I mean, like
head on
collisions that made music that literally changed the world.
Yeah.
You know,
that's the thing. It's not a pretty story, you know.
No.
And I tried not to shy from it, you know. And it's. I remember Jim Dickinson. This is a leap, but you know, after Elvis died and the city got interested in making money, when I was growing up, Memphis wanted to present itself as a slice of European culture in the South, you know, high tea at the Peabody,
right.
Classical music. We don't listen to that, you know, that old slave stuff as, you know, no, not us. And then once Elvis died and money was to be made, and the city fathers said, oh, wait a minute, maybe that thing we've been despising and abhorring
right.
all these decades, maybe, you know, the kids seem to like it. There's
right.
money in it.
Right.
And I remember Jim saying that the efforts to organize the Memphis music community are always going to be futile because these are artistic souls who congregate in the dark at night,
mm-hmm.
you know, and have strong opinions and aren't going to be sitting in a room and voting at a meeting.
No, and they're like Quicksilver. It's just like, you know, the harder you try to grab them, they just, you know, slip out. And I mean, just the notion of that sort of, you know, you can call it corporate or whatever. It's like, yeah, no, we're here to help the music industry in Memphis. It's like, well, are you really though? Or like, because the thing is like the people that do good stuff it's always, I mean, they're going to do it regardless of who's on a board or a committee.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, you need their help. They don't need your help.
I remember, again, kind of hopping and skipping here, and it's a story I told in the book. I always, when I'm, doing interviews, I try to pay the subject and
I love this part. Yeah.
an honorarium because, Rufus Thomas has given me his time.
Yes.
Right? So, and his story the interview he's going to give me for my documentary is going to help my documentary.
Yes.
And there's a budget for the documentary, so since he's an element in it, he should be paid some minor honorarium for his time.
Sure.
And so as I started getting involved in film, a New York WNET crew comes into town, I'm working with them, and they're going to do a bunch of interviews. And I said, well, you gotta, these people have light bills and heating bills, and you're going to make something off them. You got to let them make something off you. You got to pay for the interview. I've never paid for an interview in my life. And me and this guy had this argument at a restaurant in Overton Square, me and the producer, and when it was done, he agreed to pay. And he walked across the street to the French Quarter Inn. At that time it was like the second most expensive hotel in town.
Right.
And he's arguing with me about paying $50 to somebody who's going to be in his film.
Right. And this is somebody who's like, their life story is really the only thing that they have that you can't be taken away.
Exactly.
And a lot of it wasn't very easy. And they went through a lot of hard times and depression to get to where to bring the joy that they did.
And the publicity, the answer is always, well, they're going to get free publicity from this. It's like, dude, the people selling their albums don't pay these people.
Yeah.
They're not getting free publicity. They're not getting
No.
free anything. They're getting abused. And so I set out early on and have stuck to that. These people deserve to be, interview subjects deserve to be paid. It's not paying for information, it's respecting time.
Exactly. I mean, and like you said, even, it's symbolic. It's more than just like the monetary figure. It's like, look, I'm giving you what I can here, here. Like, it's sort of more than a handshake, but it's a sort of this tacit agreement. Like, I respect your story.
A sign, exactly.
Yeah.
Sign of respect.
That's great. Well, good on you for doing that. Let's see. What else is good?
Well, I was kind of curious about the way Sons of Mudboy has worked out. Y'all figure, I'll spoiler alert. Y'all figure prominently in the new chapter.
Yeah.
But it's the logical place where the story would go. That the children of the of three of the members of Mudboy play with the surviving members still.
Right. Yes, Jimmy, the one least likely to survive, is the last man
Him and
standing.
Jerry Lee, right?
I'll tell you what, man. Right. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's funny because there was, I guess it was a given that we were going to get into music. It was certainly, for me, it wasn't like, you must do this,
Right.
It was just like, I don't know if you saw, somebody put up footage from a blues festival downtown recently where like, it's kind of like some Super 8 and they synced it. And it's like, there's the artist tent and it's my dad's opening up his guitar case and Jim's opening up his and Luther and I are both there just like, so it was sort of a foregone conclusion at that point. But, we had our own things going on, our own set of influences, and for a long time, I hate to say it, we just sort of took it for granted. They were just always there.
Yeah.
We didn't. I mean, we knew that, but you don't know.
Yeah.
But the funny story that I have is that when I first sort of like got a kind of key into the world of like, well, wait a minute, maybe we could do this. Is Luther and I were hanging out. When I lived in the Shrine Building. We were hanging out playing guitar, and I started playing Kodan. And I started singing it. And because like I was afraid to sing in the house, I'd play guitar all day long. If Baker was coming over, I'd make sure I was playing guitar. Oh, I didn't know you were coming over. What's up? I was just playing guitar, man. That's cool. But I started singing it, and this visceral feeling happened. And like
Wow.
it was so hot, I just stopped, and Luther and I started cracking up out of joy. But what my dad, like the door was shut. His teenage son was hanging out with his friends. Dad walked by and just heard me playing, singing it, and stopped, and I was falling out in laughter. He was like, "I guess they're making fun of me," like he thought that we were goofing on him.
Wow.
It's playing with them when they're alive, and then carrying it on when they weren't, and those are the two different things. Like the Pinnacles were like the brewery gig where
Oh yeah.
in '95, where that was the first time that we all played with Mudboy. Me, Luther, Cody, Paul Taylor. Ben was a little young, but like we played with Mudboy. That was, and then we did it for like, until Lee was killed. Like we did it a few times, and that was like, I mean, that was making it,
Yeah.
That was like,
wow.
We're playing with the men.
You're on the big stage.
Yes, and then as time went on, like
take this kid's table.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm out of here, man. Don't give me milk, give me beer. And then, our dads early on, and then certainly when things were changing, instilled in us in the concept of playing somebody home.
In what?
Playing somebody home.
Oh, interesting.
So I was on tour when Baker died. So I couldn't go to the funeral, and I was just, and my dad was like, "You're working, Baker wants you to work, you're where you need to be, because I was really upset. And, they sat and played, I think, Can't Feel at Home.
At the service?
Yeah.
I remember it.
And it was like, how are we going to get through it?
Yeah.
Like, this is our brother, our comrade, And out of nowhere, Roland Janes, who weaves beautifully through this book, Roland Janes just sort of emerges in the aisle between the pews. And it was as if there's a glass and he's behind the console, and it's like, we got to get a take, and you behave for Roland.
Yeah.
And they did, So then when Jim died and my dad died, when my dad was sick, he was like, you have to keep singing these songs.
Yeah.
People need to know who Furry Lewis is. People need to hear Casey Jones. People need to hear this music, it's important. So luckily we enjoyed playing the music as well, So it took on a different cast once. It was just us, And like, again, we didn't do any kind of like planning, like, we should make a record. We should be the sons of Mudboy and like, tell the story. It's just, we just sort of get together whenever we can, and who knows? There's no point in sort of trying to codify it at all.
Man, I would go to those gigs, the pop-up gigs y'all would do, like at DKDC every now and then. And I remember one time, talking to some stranger in front of me. Oh, I think he turns around and he goes, he'd wandered in off the street. And I was like, who is this? What's going on?
Right.
And because everyone was so swept up in it,
Yeah.
and it's the sign of success, This stranger could feel the communing, the communing of the room with y'all and the band, and could feel the communing of these songs with y'all's dads and the people they learned it from.
I mean, yes, and like, and there's what we picked up on was like there was joy and pain and a lot of arguments and grown men arguing with one another and us as kids hearing
Egos
about it.
clashing,
Totally
collisions,
egos.
man.
I mean, it's like Mudboy. It's like it wasn't always pretty.
Yeah, exactly.
And I was I remember hearing some of those conversations. It was like. There's definitely a good reason why my dad was a well-established solo artist, because he was like, it was like, I am not dealing with the band. I remember, because I always had a band,
Yeah.
Matter of fact, when that live Mudboy record was cut, Luther was there, and he was like, "Where's Steve?" And my dad told Luther, he's like, "Oh, he's got a gig," and Luther was just like, "What?" Because I was playing in punk rock bands, hardcore bands, because I got in the skate scene and the antenna scene.
Yeah.
So I was playing Caroline Smallwood's, back. So that was another thing. But anyway, like whenever there's like a band thing would happen, my dad would just like he'd hear me bitching about something, and he'd just kind of walk by and shake his head and say, "Band dynamics." That was his term for it.
Band dynamics.
So
damn band dynamics.
Yeah, totally. But so but like that's when you have this community. It's like they did love each other, and you can hear that, and you can hear the years of growing up and starting families, and and that kind of thing. And then we just sort of did the same thing. And I think, you talk about DKDC. I think that's, up until 2020. That's your through line moving forward, at least it is for me, because there's young people playing there, and like it's just, I'm sure every town has a Magic club. I'm not saying that we're the only place that Magic happens, but I've seen it happen so many times, and things that I've thrown together, things that other people have thrown together. That place in particular, I think Memphis is so much about certain spaces and their sort of psychoactive or metaphysical kind of vibes.
Want to learn more about how you can support the Levitt Shell and its mission of building community through music, education, and diversity? Head to levittshell.org. You can read up on our 85-year history and check out our schedule of live and virtual events. Visit our Shell shop to grab all the swag and find out ways you can participate in our mission, whether that's through donations, volunteering, sponsoring a show, or becoming a member of our Shell Circle. Once again, that's levittshell.org.
I think there's a similarity between Memphis and Vegas. And what it is that people arrive with preconceptions.
Sure.
People who are tuned in to what we're talking about arrive with preconceptions that allow them freedoms they don't allow themselves at home.
Yeah.
So people go to Vegas and
they
they gamble or whore or whatever
Sure.
in ways they would never do in their hometown.
Right.
And in Memphis they come and they cross the tracks is what
Yeah.
I think it is. When I went on my first book tour with this book, I would at every town I would tell people, look, go to the places you're scared to go to.
Right.
There's no reason to be scared.
Yeah.
There's good music there. There's good people there. You be nice. They'll be nice. And
Be
you
nice
will
or
find,
leave.
Yeah, be nice or leave. You will find this is the way bridges get built, by interacting.
Exactly.
And if you don't interact, it's not going to happen. And so you've got to go to where you think you're not supposed to go.
Right, because there'll be a friendly face there,
Yeah.
and just glad to see you, and then it broadens your perspective, and then you take that home with you.
And you take that home, and
Yeah. It's
I
better
remember
than something you would take home from Vegas, probably.
there is a difference between Memphis and Vegas. But yeah, I think people allow themselves a freedom here, so they go to a church service or a blues club or a kind of place that they wouldn't feel comfortable going to elsewhere.
Yeah.
And they think Memphis is magic. And it's like, okay, I'll buy that Memphis is magic, but I'll bet you there's magic in your hometown
Exactly.
that you are not checking out.
Yeah, I mean, there's, and again, how much of that is born out of struggle, and it's interesting when you talk about like Memphis being the top of the Mississippi Delta, and it's only been recent years. My dad was from Greenville, but we never went down there. But like I played down there last year, I think it was, and I haven't done that drive in a while. And it's, again, maybe I'm being a little too about it, but like it's a 3-hour drive, basically. It's a 3-hour drive to Nashville, and you don't think anything about it because it's on a superhighway, as they call it. Driving to Greenville, it felt like the pressure on the car just got more and more. Like
Really?
Yeah, it was menacing. I just feel like there's a lot to answer for.
That's true.
And I don't know moving forward how that will come out in the music or the popular culture.
I see a lot of promise and hope in Memphis, and I draw largely from the public school experience my kids had.
Sure.
When I was 7, Dr. King was assassinated.
Right.
Here. That's when I learned the word curfew. And I remember, I remember, and my family, and my father, an attorney downtown, invited an African-American attorney and his wife to dinner at our house.
Right.
It was like, my dad realized, let's begin my mom and dad realized, let's begin healing on a one-to-one basis. And when I learned that, I didn't recall that, but when I learned that, it made a lot of sense to me, as it helped me understand the way I was raised.
Yeah.
And when my kids brought home friends of, not only African Americans, but Indian Americans,
Sure.
and people from all over the world, all shades of color,
Yeah.
and creed, and they thought nothing about it. They'd never known to think otherwise. It gave me great hope.
Right.
It gave me great hope for our city.
It's not that they're even intentional in doing it. It was just
Yeah.
Tuesday.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
No,
and I never pointed it out.
Right.
Because
right.
I didn't want to make it a thing.
Exactly.
I just
Yeah.
quelled inside.
And that's, to me, the importance of public school and music in public school, which is obviously very threatened. But I mean, because that was it for me. I mean, like, I was coming up, and it was, I wouldn't call it super diverse. I mean, these people hung out with each other and these people hung out with each other. But in jazz band, taught by Bill McKee, who played in the Rhythm Hounds, you know, who was an actual guy that played gigs, you know. It was just about, can you play? You know? I mean, music.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, and I remember being very thankful for it. And I just, you know, I feel like there is this coming diversity. It's just like whatever the political climate is, like you can't. The younger people they just don't see it as much. They don't see the lines. As
Yes,
much,
exactly.
You know,
exactly.
so, and I'm, you know, you just bring up Dr. King, and like that's a big, you know, folding point. I feel like I remember my dad talking about it. Just that, like, you know, Beale Street and downtown, everything just shut. He said everything shut like a book. You know. And because, you know, he had been hanging out at Stax a little bit because he had the Enterprise deal.
Right.
You know, and then you know, there's a story of was it Don Nix and Duck were gonna leave the studio,
And
Isaac was like, let me drive you home.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
It's
And Duck tells a story about being taking a smoke break on the sidewalk in between a session, and he and Isaac are outside on the curb. He said a cop car screeched up onto the curb, jumped out and said to Duck, "Are you okay?" And Duck said, "I was never more embarrassed in my life."
I'm sure. Yeah, he's like, I'm better than you. I'm hanging out with Isaac Hayes. Well, yeah, that, you know, and that makes, you know, like, so say it's 1995. I mean, you're looking backwards, but there was also, you know, some contemporary interviews that you did.
Oh, yeah.
Right. You know, can you explain sort of the difference of the vibe that you felt of like interviewing somebody in real time? You know, like talking to Baker about Mud Boy or something like that was different than like talking about the plantation into the 50s.
Right.
Like that was a world away from you. This was something you could kind of touch, you know.
I really think it's about creating an intimacy in an interview and a mood, and you can't walk into the hard stuff right away. You know, you have to build up to it, and for all those guys, your dad included, you know, I mean, I've always thought my stutter helped me as an interviewer.
Disarming.
Because it disarms people, but also one thing I've learned as a stutterer is when I'm blocked, having an extended silence because I can't get the sound out, people fill in the space. So I learned as an interviewer to not say anything sometimes, so that people might continue a thought deeper, and it's worked, you know, 80% of the time. And it allows them to go somewhere deeper in their head, and if there's an intimacy created, it allows that depth to be expressed, so that people talking about you know, racial incidents that they experienced in the past, I could get a real sense of it. I could really feel the pain. The one that pops to mind is Dickinson driving home from a fake Marquise gig. He's dropped off someone from the back seat, and now it's him and an African-American trumpet player, I think, in the front seat. And a cop starts tailing them because it's an integrated car. And when Jim pulled up to the guy's house to drop him off, the guy knew that they were being tailed, you know. So Jim waits outside to make sure the guy gets inside okay. The cop comes out of his car. Jim rolls down the window, comes up to Jim's window and says, and this is just unbelievably horrible, he says, "Well, why don't you just go ahead and live with them then?" You know? And like, you're not gonna get that kind of, I think you have to work a little bit to get that kind of story. And that comes from having a good relationship with the people and creating that kind of feel in an interview.
A bit of trust.
Trust,
yeah. Yeah, I mean, because
and you mentioned that, you know, the hatred and the pain, that the story is not, you know, and the story of Memphis music is not only of joyous collaboration.
No, absolutely.
You know, the joy, part of the joy comes from achieving it, defying the odds and achieving it. Everything, all the success from Memphis is against the odds. You know, people think of this as a music town, you know, as a record company town, but it never was. You know, no national label. I think Mercury for a minute had an office here. No national label has ever had an office here. Homegrown labels have become national, you know, before they caved in. But we've never been the commerce center. We're the artistic center. We're you know, when Nashville won't let you do it, people make the 3-hour drive to Memphis.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm curious to see how that scene continues to. The Nashville is a very different Nashville now, and I'm curious to see what the sort of trickle down from that. You know, how that affects Memphis.
Well, what do you, when you say it's very different, what do you think?
There's so much of a larger, like kind of the popular, bigger indie rock presence, you know, or Jack White, and then just like this sort of new face of country where it's sort of like just 20-something-year-old kind of dirtbag looking dudes just kind of doing whatever, but it's the hipster thing or whatever. It's not just like Garth Brooks,
right? You
know, that kind of thing. I mean, that thing is still there, but you know, it's just gotten so big. I mean, you know, even just as a town, it's like, you know, the Cranes, it's like the next Austin, and people moving from LA and all that kind of stuff. And Memphis being Memphis, I just feel like, you know, people are like, man, we're gonna get gentrified. I'm like, I think we're a little too rugged to.
I hope you're right.
Yeah, to fend that off.
You know, I just love that they got this shot for the cover. It's I sent a bunch of photos up there. Right. And they came back and said, what if we put this one on the cover? And I loved it because it's not explicitly musical.
Yep.
You know, it defies, it goes up against the, you know, the great Southern fear of the black man and the white woman. It's so of the era too. You know, this is a 70s shot. When I was a kid, you know, this was it. And I shopped at that Zare in the background.
Oh, me too. Yeah, that was the first thing I noticed was the Zare. I was like, oh man, I tried to buy a fake Michael Jackson Beat It jacket at that Zare, man. Wow. Yeah. That is a photo for sure.
When they first came up with this cover too, I thought, you know, it wasn't exactly like this. We had to tweak it some, but when they first came up with it, I thought, man, people are going to look at this cover and go, what's this old 60s book doing on the, or, you know, this 1972 book doing on the new arrivals table? You know, but it's got just enough modern to it to work.
Now, who took that photo?
Tav.
Tav took that photo.
Yeah, Tav Falco.
When did you become aware of the whole like Eggleston Tav scene? Or did you know that they were like a thing unto themselves, like, you know, kind of a visual art?
I came to find out, you know.
Right.
I remember figuring out, you know, I knew Jim and Mudboy.
Right.
And then Alex, and seeing Alex at the antenna with the Panther Burns on time.
Right.
And Eggleston, I don't remember when I figured out what that was about, but I remember one night Tav inviting me to Bill's Walnut Grove house.
Right.
And I think the first time I really hung with Bill was in the making of this book.
Okay, yeah.
You know.
Yeah, it's hard for me to know where the lines blur, just because like I've known you forever, and you sort of seem to have been, you know, in our lives, and yet I sometimes I don't know when people come in and come out.
Yeah,
you know.
Same here. You know, it's hard, and it goes back so long.
I know it does. Well, that's great, man.
Well, this has been great. I really appreciate your coming out to do it.
I'm glad you asked me, man. Let's do it again in a public space when we can. You know?
Yes. Yes, we all look forward to entering the great outdoors again without trepidation.
I think you need to make some It Came From Memphis shirts. that yellow with that red would look.
It's cool.
That would pop, man.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you, Robert.
Well, thanks, Steve.
All right.
Thanks so much for tuning in to part 2 of our great series with Robert Gordon and Steve Selvidge. We're truly grateful to both of those guys for their time and their talents. If you want to learn more about Robert's work or order your own copy of It Came From Memphis, head over to therobertgordon.com or grab one from your favorite local bookstore. Of course, if you want to learn more about what we're up to at the Levitt Shell and how you can help, head to levittshell.org. We'd truly appreciate it. Thanks again for joining us. We'll be here again soon for the next episode of The Shellcast.